pages of your newspaper to the in front of your television screen, separating the noise from the news and definitely bringing you the facts on the ground. Trending stories around of the week. Welcome to the Headliner. My name is Monica Chanda, and on the Headliner we bring you different segments where we capture the trending stories of the day. In the first segment, take you around the conversation of the day in the second segment. And well, today we are looking at the economy, and we will be joined by our guest who is in studio joining me for that conversation. World Bank at the start of the year had actually projected the growth of Zimbabwe's economy to grow by 3.6%. We will have an appreciation. How has the economy grown over the course of the year and more? So let's get to speak to our guest and welcome him. Dr. Prosper Chitambara, an economic analyst, and he's also an economic development economic specialist, joining us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
The post-budget seminars are happening. The Minister of Finance and Economic Development and Investment Promotion, he did, of course, give us that budget, that $58.2 trillion budget. And I know there have been so many consultations, so many conversations happening. But give us a take of what has been on the ground so far. What have people been saying? Some of those sectors, some of those groupings with regard the budget itself.
Yeah, so I think we saw a bit of an outcry from some stakeholders, especially around the tax proposals that were unveiled by the minister. I had meetings with funeral assurers, for example. I had meetings with the employers. I had meetings with the parliamentarians, and we were actually able to get the views from those different stakeholders. And we prepared position papers on what we thought the minister should or adjust in terms of his proposals. And I'm happy that at least the ministry has been forthcoming in terms of taking on board the concerns and the inputs by the different stakeholders. So since these are proposals, I know there's going to be adjustments, tweakings, taking into account some of the concerns that people have actually raised. But suffice it to say that I think it's a very audacious budget with a very strong emphasis and focus on domestic resource mobilization through the taxation. Yes, so I think that's for me, that's the key highlight. In terms of the spending, there has been some improvements, but not major changes across the different vote allocations of ministries and departments.
Okay, so I suppose we will be scrutinizing the dynamics at play with regard to the economy, and Dr. Prosper Chitambara, I'm sure I will be picking his thoughts, even through some of the headlines which I will be sharing with you right now. So let's get straight into it. And the Wednesday Daily News, which reads, thunderstorms to pummel Zimbabwe as authorities call for citizen vigilance. The country is bracing for more heavy rains accompanied by strong winds, thunderstorms hailing up to the weekend, and which will cover the country this time around. So this also comes after storms left a trail of destruction in Manicaland, Mashingo, and the Midlands, Matabele North. That was last weekend, where infrastructure was damaged and several homes and schools had their roof blown off. We also had that story, I know, while we're present, where some of that infrastructure, some of the roofing was blown off, and we did see the Minister of State for Midlands also having to tour alongside other government officials. But let me also have your view in terms of the current situation with weather patterns. Zimbabwe is currently experiencing an El Nino,
Yes.
and this would obviously trickle down to impacting on the economy.
It has obviously adverse or negative externalities on the rest of the economy. As you know, agriculture is one of the mainstays. Of course, it also affects things like even hydroelectric generation. And of course, once agricultural output is diminished because of that exogenous factor, it affects the rest of the economy through diminished output. It also puts a lot of pressure on the price of food commodities. And it also means the government then has to, because there's a deficit obviously that's created in terms of food. So government has to fill that or plug in that deficit through the importation, which again has implications on our trade balance and also on our current account position.
But for the farmers, what it means is I've seen some of the rains coming in. Just having spoken to another expert just during the course of the week, he did say it's not too late. There is still some hope there, so I'm sure for the farmers that's some relief. But nonetheless, there are a lot of irrigation schemes and some of those government initiatives that farmers can take advantage of. Let's move on to the Chronicle, which tagged divorce cases spike as statistics has Blair recording 658 fractured marriages, infidelity, social media, grudges, you name it, and gender-based violence, among others, stated as top drivers of divorces across the country, with Blair alone recording such a huge number. A social ill, and still it looks like these topics that we have today, some of these headlines that we're having today, Doc, given the context of a divorce, these also still trickle down to the economy. There's still that effect if we are to look at the family breakdown.
So the toll that it creates on the family and ultimately on the nation, it has an effect on the state of the economy, on the health of the economy. Because it also then affects mental health issues, and mental health issues affect the productivity and well-being of citizens, which again affects the economy, because in health economics we say that a healthy citizenry is a healthy nation. So if your mental health is not stable and sound, that also affects your productivity and the overall well-being and prosperity of the economy.
After all, your health is your wealth. And in another interesting headline, the Herald tagged Zimbabwe to sell water to South African town as cabinet approves deal to sell water to South Africa. And this also comes after a proposal for the multi-million water treatment plant that's in Beitbridge to sell water to Messina in South Africa. This also having to improve water resources, cooperation, governance between the two countries. Zimbabwe and South Africa have always had these bilateral ties, and if we are to look at the statistics, South Africa is Zimbabwe's biggest trading partner in Africa, and having to see this kind of exchange, this cooperation, and Zimbabwe having to sell water to South Africa. Does this also speak to even the management of our water bodies?
I think so, to some extent. But I think overall it's positive. It helps also to kind of tilt the balance in terms of trade, also maybe in favor of Zimbabwe. Because currently, of course, South Africa dominates. Because not just in terms of South Africa-Zimbabwe trade relations, but even South Africa and the rest of other African countries. So I think that's a good development. At least we're taking advantage of our competitive advantages, including, of course, the management of some of our water resources.
So, I suppose that brings to a close the first segment on the headliner, and we'll be taking you through the economy and much more, the dynamics, and our guest, Dr. Prosper Chitambara, giving us an appreciation of the landscape of the economy as we draw to the close of the year. Join us, don't go anywhere. This is the headliner. Welcome once again. This is the second segment. The program is the headliner, and today we are joined by a guest. He is an economic analyst. Of course, he looks at various issues around the economy, and he's not new to conversations such as this. Once again, Dr. Prosper Chitambara joining us on the headliner.
Thank you.
Let's get straight into the recent presentations by the World Bank about Zimbabwe being one of the fastest growing economies, and looking at the specific economic indicators, looking at the metrics themselves used to have such an assertion. At the beginning of the year, January 2023, we did see them projecting our economy to grow by 3.6%. We've had a number of challenges, like any other country in the region, and that could probably have affected the economy. But given the projections recently from the World Bank, what would you say about the assertion? And what would you say in terms of what it means to the Zimbabwean?
Yeah. So this year, like you say, I correctly highlight, it has been a challenging year in many respects. We've been affected by the geopolitical trends and developments. We've had an election. We've also had some episodes of chronic high inflation, a bit of instability, which affects ultimately the economy. But in terms of growth, initially the government, the official projections were, I think, about 4% initially. I think when the minister presented the national budget last year, but that was revised to about 5.3%, and that was further revised to 5.5%, which actually means Zimbabwe is one of the top performing economies, just when you look at growth rate. Because there are not many countries, not just in Africa, even across the world, that are actually growing by 5.5%. But it's a decline from last year's growth of 6.5%. In the previous year, the economy had actually rebounded by 7.8%. But of course, we were also coming from 2 years of economic decline on account of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also on account of the climate-induced shocks, where droughts. So I think 5.5 is good, but I think it's important to ensure that we are creating, number one, jobs. Because what has tended to happen in most cases is that the economy could actually be growing without creating a lot of employment opportunities. And one of the key labor market challenges we have in Zimbabwe is that the economy has not been creating enough decent and full and productive employment opportunities for those people that seek employment.
But then again, despite what you've highlighted, one would probably ask, what are those metrics, what are those indicators that would have been used to actually come to that assertion that the economy is growing?
Yeah.
Because looking at 5.5%, that is a favorable growth.
It is,
and
actually.
it speaks to that positive trajectory
It is.
in the economy. It also speaks to those policies that are being proffered.
Yeah, it is actually. Or it's really driven by a number of sectors, obviously. Agriculture, for example, we have seen there's been some positive developments in agriculture. Cereal production, for example, Zimbabwe has done very well. I think we recorded a 40% increase just in wheat production. Was maize, I think there has been an improvement, but I think there's still a bit of challenges. I think the challenge there has been that probably most of our farmers prefer to do tobacco, because tobacco has been doing very, very well for a very long period of time. And it also obviously contributes to foreign currency generation. We've seen mining, I think for the greater part of the year, did very well because commodity prices were on the high side. So then manufacturing has been rebounding again, but of course manufacturing has been affected by the currency instability and the macroeconomic instability. But I would say those three sectors, they contribute a lot, obviously, to the growth metrics in terms of real GDP growth. But of course, nowadays, the World Bank and even other institutions, the UN, they are also now trying to advise countries to focus on other non-economic metrics related to, say, the welfare and the well-being of the citizens. Because yes, the economy must grow and grow inclusively and sustainably, but ultimately what we want to see is a massive or a significant improvement in the welfare and the well-being of the citizens. Because ultimately that's what sustainable development is all about. Sustainable development is about ensuring that, for example, there are fewer and fewer women are actually dying while giving birth, what we call the maternal mortality ratio. That's an important metric in terms of sustainable development. Yes, for Zimbabwe, we've seen massive improvements again, I think from about 600 10 years ago to the current 363 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. Then life expectancy, we've also seen life expectancy is improved because we're still below especially the developed economies. So those are some of the metrics that we need to consider. And of course, employment again, like I said. Then issues of stability, it's also critical. And ensuring also that the entrepreneurship ecosystem.
I was actually going to ask you about that, so because clearly entrepreneurship has been one of the areas that is being promoted.
Globally. I think we need to, it's very important. Because that's one way really of empowering the economy, empowering the citizens by supporting whether they are young entrepreneurs, even women entrepreneurs. And when we look at Zimbabwe, we have high levels of informality, And for me, that's also an indicator that we have lots of entrepreneurs in our country, and given greater levels of support, I think they could actually contribute even more to sustainable development in our nation. But entrepreneurship really for me is one of the key areas that we need to be emphasizing and focusing on going forward. Because ultimately, even according to the World Bank, it's actually the smaller entrepreneurs that have the greatest potential for creating employment opportunities, and not your big multinational enterprises. So we need to support the small entrepreneurs. And that, I like the direction of the budget in that regard. We've seen a number of proposals that are actually aimed at even strengthening linkages between the formal and the informal sector as a way of also incentivizing formalization of the latter.
Which is critical. But while we are speaking about that growth trajectory and the projections, the indications of Zimbabwe's rapid economic growth, Doc, let's look at even the challenges and drawbacks, because it is one thing for us to speak about the economic growth, but then it's also about looking at the drawbacks themselves, and that could have been overlooked, that could have been downplayed, and seeing how these might even shape the understanding of the country's economic trajectory.
I think for this year, the major drawback has been, apart from obviously from the currency instability issues, the electricity situation. Yes, there was an improvement at some point in time, but we've seen, I think, electricity production has actually gone down. I think it's also because Kariba, the water levels have gone down. Of course, government is trying to enhance our capacity, and there are a lot of opportunities really. I went to Wonde Valley 3 months ago. And in Wonde Valley, the owner of the estates has actually come up with a mini hydroelectric plant, which is actually powering the whole of Wonde Valley. And I believe if we could incentivize that in other areas, I think that could see Zimbabwe actually becoming self-sufficient in terms of electricity generation, because we have so many water bodies across the country, and we've also a lot of opportunities for solar electricity generation. And I'm happy that a lot of companies have actually taken that on board. So I think, yes, it's a challenge, but I think going forward, I see a lot of opportunities, and I see the situation actually drastically improving on account of the efforts by the private sector, and of course, what government is already doing.
Hold that thought, Doc, because we still have a lot to touch on in the third and final segment. We are joined by an economic analyst as we take a look at one of the biggest stories of the week, where the World Bank announced Zimbabwe's growth rate. We'll touch more on that in that final segment. Don't go anywhere. This is the headliner. Welcome back to the third and final segment, and get yourself a glass of water, a bottle of water, because the heat wave is still with us. And I'm sure some of you are feeling all heated up, but never mind. This is the headliner. We're taking you through some of those hot stories of the week. And the big one, Zimbabwe's economic growth. And we continue this conversation with our guest, Dr. Prosper Chitambara. Once again, we welcome you.
Thank you.
Let's get to continue in light of the narratives. I know we did speak about some of those indicators. We also spoke about what measurements were used to measure this growth rate announcement, among many other issues. But we also want to look at the intricacies of Zimbabwe's economic landscape, how we reconcile, say, the reports of rapid growth and even the persistent challenges that are seen in the country. I know it seems we continue to have these conversations about hyperinflation, inflation issues. We seem to have challenges to do with some of those price distortions, among many other issues. But when we are trying to tie those reports and even what's happening in the country, currency instability, for instance, or fluctuating employment rates, although we're seeing a lot of management of some of the currency issues, management of employment issues. What does this then tell us about, say, the broader narrative of economic advancement in the country?
I think that's an important question, especially given the fact that economic growth and the ability to sustain growth is key in terms of ensuring that sustainable development actually happens. And I would say one of the challenges that we have had, of course, not just in Zimbabwe, but across most African economies, has been the failure to sustain a high growth trajectory over a longer period of time. And in fact, that's one of the key lessons that we learn from the Chinese model. So in China, say from 1978 up to just pre-COVID, 2019, they've actually been able to grow the Chinese economy by not less than 10% every year. And that same World Bank has also told us that if we are to achieve the vision of being an upper middle income economy by 2030, at least from now until 2030, the economy must grow by a gigantic 15%.
Is that realistic?
No, it's not.
Because
It's
we
not.
need to be
It's not. It's not. It's definitely not realistic. It was 15%. Yeah, given the challenges that we've had in the past. But again, I don't think it will be possible to hit that 15% target.
And given,
So
given
if we can be able to sustain a high growth rate, say for at least 10 years, even if we grow by 5% for at least 10 years, I think that will have a massive impact in terms of poverty reduction and also in terms of employment creation. Because when you look at just our growth performance, say for the past 5 years, I think the first 2 years of the last 5 years, the economy was actually in decline. So but then from 2021, we began to see a rebound here.
I had to
Yeah.
apologize for interjecting there, because
Yes, yes.
even when we make comparisons, because I know there seem to be these contrasting narratives around Zimbabwe's economic performance, and this is not just new to Zimbabwe right now, because we seem to be having some sort of global shift in economies. There's a lot of movement that's happening, movement downwards in terms of a lot of the economy's performances. The United States, for instance, they had to revisit some of their policies.
Yes.
South Africa, for
Yeah,
instance,
no, that's
was also facing.
it's a good observation actually.
Yes.
But I would say that most of the developed economies, they actually struggle even to go beyond 3% growth. So I think it's a global phenomenon. So it actually means that our projected 5.5%, it's on the high side compared to what's actually happening. South Africa again has been struggling to even go beyond 2%, 3%. Yeah. So it's a challenge among a lot of economies across the globe currently. Even China, we've also seen China growth has actually been slowing down to around 5% again. So it tells you that we are in very challenging, perilous times, like the Bible says.
Okay, but then still back to the narratives, because we have these contrasting narratives about Zimbabwe's performance economically, and when looking at issues of development.
Yes, yes.
And I want to bring your attention, the National Development Strategy 1, of course, the economic blueprint, with those 14 priority areas. One of those, engagement, re-engagement. And what am I getting at here? Let's contextualize the claims within the broader regional as well as the global economic frameworks, and what the implications are for foreign investment, trade partnerships, for instance, and even looking at international economic relations.
Yeah, I think the engagement, rather, and re-engagement, I think that's very, very important. And I think we've made a bit of headway. We saw government actually establishing the high-level structured dialogue platform on arrears clearance, which basically brings together government, the creditors and development partners, and it's being championed obviously by the president of the ADB and the former president of Mozambique. And a lot of progress has been made in terms of coming up with consensus on the macroeconomic reforms to be implemented, the governance as well as institutional reforms that will be implemented. And I'm sure next year we're going to be seeing a lot of the implementation, especially on the macroeconomic side. We know government is going to enter into a staff monitored program with the International Monetary Fund, I think, which is important in terms of our re-engagement with multilateral financial institutions and even with the rest of the world. So I think next year there's going to be a lot of movements. This year, I think the elections also slowed down a bit of progress in terms of reforms. But next year, now that the elections are done and dusted, I think there's going to be a lot of emphasis on implementing macroeconomic governance as well as institutional reforms within the framework of the dialogue, structured dialogue platform series.
Well, there's just so much to talk about, Doc. Looks like we'll have to tell our producers to have you back again for these conversations. But in closing, there is the finance minister who was recently awarded Best Performing Finance Minister. And with that in mind, let me tie it with even media coverage of economic issues. How would you rate how we report on issues of the economy and how we actually contextualize, how we analyze issues around the economy?
I think issues of the economy generally are well covered by even both the public sector and also by the private sector players. Was in business issues, economic issues, there's lesser politics there. So it's just about analyzing the numbers and the metrics and how that affects the ordinary citizen or even the rest of the economy. So I'm happy with the coverage. I think there's been an improvement. Even the coverage of the national budget by both the public and the private sectors has been very balanced. And I think I'll probably say well done to you guys.
I suppose well done to my comrades. And we get to end the year on the headliner on a positive note. Kudos to the journalists who have been doing much in covering the news. And let's keep those news stories trending. And hopefully we will also have more trending news around traffic safety during this festive season. Also protection. Don't forget, if you are going away, keep your homes safe, but also be safe on the ground. If you're going to be enjoying the time in your farms, your plots, get to farm well. Until next time, and to our guest, Dr. Prosper Chitambara, wishing you a Merry Christmas. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And Merry Christmas and a prosperous 2024 to you all.
To my producers who have been absolutely phenomenal. I know we've had a couple of laughs and jokes with my co-host, Curtly, who's not in. He's already started his Christmas early. And it looks like I'll be taking off my jacket, well, letting my hair down, or should I say my wig off, to go enjoy Christmas. Merry Christmas from all of us on the headliner. My name is Monica Chanda. Let's goodbye.